Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we are at CodePaLOusa,
CodePaLOusa,
Kentucky.
It's been a few years since we've been here.
It has been.
Yeah.
Chad Green, our good friend, has decided to throw us a big 20th anniversary party here.
Well, and through the power of time shifting, he'll have already thrown that party.
That's right.
By the time this show comes out.
Yeah. I mean, this is August 18th, and this is about the time 20 years ago.
Yeah, you recorded that very first show.
With Mark Dunn,
Yeah, back in the day.
There wasn't a thing as podcast.
No.
Podcast didn't exist.
It wasn't a thing. And it was Pat Hines, of course, who's our rabbit's foot. We make sure he starts every new show off.
Yeah, and it was funny because I was just a public radio fan, you know?
Yep.
And so I didn't call it a podcast because that term didn't exist. I just called it an internet audio talk show for .NET developers, put MP3s up on my website, go download them and listen.
And here we are 20 years later.
20 years later. Yeah. So congratulations, buddy, for being there for most of it.
Yeah, you're the one who started, so you're the ones with the congrats. I showed up later.
Show 100, okay?
Well, yeah.
Only 1,700 shows
Only
together.
1,700 shows together.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I got to say. Let's roll the crazy music for Better Know Framework.
Awesome. All right, man, what do you got?
Wilderness Labs.
Oh, yeah.
That's familiar with them?
College, right? Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Wilderness Labs does IoT boards and stuff, and they have a great developers program, and they have a dev kit that they sell with all C#.NET stuff, and you can plug and play and all of their modules and everything. They're very, very happy in Visual Studio and a lot of great stuff. So this came up because one of the guys at AppV Next was asking, he wanted to get a short run of boards with embedded code, .NET code in them. Mm-hmm. And this was
it seems to be the way to run .NET in an IoT board. It's pretty great. I have a set.
Yeah.
Brian sent me one, and doing some fun stuff with it.
Now, do you do the embedding right there? Do you burn it into the ROM in C# in Visual Studio?
You can,
Or do you have to send it away to get that done?
Well, if you want to produce them at scale, then you send it out.
Yeah.
But when it's just an experimenting kit.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I'm down the Home Assistant path, right? So I end up in ESP32 and a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, of course you are.
It's in the darkness.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even, don't get me started.
I remember the Basic Stamp.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, have you ever heard of Basic Stamp? And Richard goes, oh boy, prepare to lose a lot of time.
It's a lot of time.
And I did. Yeah. It was fun though.
It is fun.
I haven't been doing the IoT stuff lately, but I figured, since the guys in AppV Next are all into this, that I would share it. So
awesome.
wildernesslabs.co. That's it. Who's talking to us, Richard?
Hey, I grabbed it's a show a little old from 1582. So a couple hundred shows ago. Our friend Dan Willeen, back before he joined Microsoft, we were talking about testing the single-page application. And he specifically at that show talked about Cypress, the library.
Yeah.
The tool, Cypress.io. And some other folks agreed with him, too. So this is actually a comment from 4 years ago from Dorian, who says, I'm working as part of a team on an Angular 4 SPA.
Oh, boy.
Angular 4. So what's that? 7 versions of Angular ago? 8 versions
More
of
than
Angular?
that.
Yeah. What are they at, 12?
14.
14?
Wow.
Okay, 10 versions of Angular ago. And we're using Cypress.io for our integration testing, and the level of bugs in the test team that we were finding dropped by 75% once we got into using it. As mentioned in the podcast with Cypress, the difficulty can lie in finding the correct element to target for tests. But once you're familiar with it, you can create some pretty great test suites, and the learning curve from tests that work to tests that are maintainable is pretty steep. But I think Cypress would benefit from more involved guides and some training and video courses, which I hope have been made by now, 4 years on. But, I can't tell you the number of times we built out a good test suite on an app we really needed to take good care of. And then came V2 of the app and all the tests needed to be redone. It's tough to build sustainable tests. But those big bang updates are part of the problem. So, Dorian, thank you so much for your comment, and a copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks, because we publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Go ahead, send us a tweet. Tweet should include more than 0 characters.
You can't push a tweet with 0 characters.
Yeah. Oh, probably more importantly, there's the limit. What is it? 200 now?
280? Yeah.
280. Tweet must not exceed 280
Must not
characters.
exceed.
Yeah. Anyway, let us introduce Martine, an award-winning CTO, UX, and UI designer and developer, international speaker, and author. Martine Dowden focuses on web interfaces that are beautiful, functional, accessible, and usable. She approaches user experience from both art and science, drawing from her degrees in psychology and visual communications. She's worked as a developer, artist, educator, and consultant since 2005. In 2015, she published a children's book, Programming Languages ABC++.
I love it.
That's a great title. She then went on to write Approachable Accessibility, Planning for Success, which was released in June 2019, and Architecting CSS, The Programmer's Guide to Effective Style Sheets in 2020. Currently, she's a CTO at Andromeda Galactic Solutions, where she continues to learn, work on, and share her passion for front-end development.
That's a heck of a commute.
It is pretty awesome.
It's only one galaxy over, so, I mean, take the train.
Space train.
There you go.
Well, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I take it this is your topic here at CodePaLOusa that you're speaking on.
I'm speaking on, I'm speaking on testing, specifically unit testing, and then I'm also speaking on CSS.
Right. I've found that working on testing on web apps, snapshot testing has been helpful for me. But how do you approach testing with Angular in particular, but web apps in general?
There's kind of 2 places I really end up focusing, because with the team I'm working with right now, I kind of look at where the bugs are, and that's generally what I'm going to focus the testing on, because there's never any way of testing everything, and it's a fool's errand to even try.
Sure.
In my opinion, like the 100% code coverage thing is not a thing.
It is a fine thing to aspire to, but, just like the dog catching the car, it's not actually a good outcome.
Yeah, no. The maintainability is not there.
But what do you think? It's at 80%. I think you're getting most of the value of testing without all of the pain of that last bit that's always breaking.
Well, but with UI, it's 80% of what are we testing?
Right.
If you think of your services, right? Because Angular has the concept of services.
Yeah.
So you, those things that, if it's a direct call, I use Firebase a lot. So if it's a direct call to Firebase and it's returning an object, what's the point? And it's just literally the function is go to Firebase, fetch this, and come back. There's not a lot of value in that as a unit test, because I'm just mocking, it's not.
Right.
But now if there's a bunch of logic or calculations or whatever, sure, that's a high value test. But then you get into the component. And so it's what do I test? Do I test the color of the button? Is there value in that? Do I test, does the button exist? Is there value in that? So you're getting into what's worth it and what's not, and then the maintainability of that. Because if with responsive web, I can't necessarily say, okay, I'm going to check that the button is at 3 pixels down and 5 pixels over.
Right.
Yeah, good luck. Right?
Yeah.
So then they could, with front end, it's really weird, because it's first off, 100% or even 80% is 80% of what? And how deep down the rabbit hole are we looking?
Right.
And then what's worthwhile? So we kind of narrowed down to the service high things that in the services where there's a lot of calculations, computations, lots of logic, those sorts of things where you have an in and an out, right? There's
so they're very testable,
right? And then and then
those
forms.
are the things that will fail too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you really don't care about, as you just said,
right?
Yeah.
And then forms, because forms are making sure that they validate correctly and those sorts of things. Because those, if I don't want you to be able to input an invalid email address, that's something I can look at. Does the input field input field correctly, fails if you input some garbage.
Yeah, if you leave out the at and the dot and things like that. I mean, and that's the kind of thing where if I ship that, it's not a breaking problem if that's not working, but it's going to ruin my database. Like cleaning up after that sucks.
Correct.
And so making sure that the validation still works is a great one. That is a reliable test.
Right.
And, should maintain version to version. And you're really sad if you miss that validation.
And you're reinforcing the truism that input is evil and users are evil and you should expect them to be evil. And input, your gazintas and your gazetas have to be good.
Or the little things like if you think of an address, right? And you think of the state, are you expecting the abbreviation? Are you expecting the full name?
Right.
What's the capitalization? Like those sorts of things, like making sure that you're only getting the input that you're supposed to get, and that you're wanting to get, again, for that database piece. Now, knowing that you're never going to do validation on the front end without protecting your database anyway, right? That validation on the front end, I can just go into DevTools and be like, haha, cute. Nope. Like but this is the reality, right? It's like this, it's like the simplest thing to hack in world history is front end validation. So you're still going to need your back end or your database to have rules.
Very testable.
Right. But it still prevents, then you can work on the UX aspect that if you're validating correctly on your front end, are you correctly showing error messages and errors messages that make sense and are relevant at the right times and, not yelling at the user when they first show up on the page. Like you can start doing a little bit more in depth with that.
So if you're brought in, as a UX and UI tester, the first thing you must notice is all the problems with the user experience. Do you also consult on that? Are your customers expecting you to say, hey, you know what, the contrast on this particular element is way off?
Yeah, I always do accessibility testing on my stuff because it's part of UX. If you've got bad accessibility, you're going to have, your UX is going to suffer, right? Because even if you're a perfectly, quote, normal user with absolutely no hindrances, no disabilities, no nothing.
Yeah.
You might still tab through your bloody form instead of clicking on each field. Well, the ability to tab through the entire form is actually part of the accessibility, accessibility criteria. So at that point, by making accessibility better, especially in forms, you're going to make it better for everybody.
Right.
So I'm going to always test that. And people that hire me know that they're going to get, that's going to be part of the things
for that too.
That's part of the things I'm going to look at. That's part of the things I'm going to be, giving them guidance on.
Well, nobody does good accessibility by accident.
Correct.
It actually has to be worked on.
Correct. It's like security. You're not going to be secure by accident.
No.
It just doesn't magically happen.
Yeah.
Speaking of security, do you test for correct authorization based on roles or claims?
I don't do a lot of that. That's not my shtick. I don't do security stuff. And I'm a front end developer, so I rely on other people to do that for me.
Yeah, that's fair. It is its own specialty too.
Right.
But when I think about input validation, I'm also thinking about SQL injection.
So I use Firebase, so I don't have to worry about that. Because there's no SQL. I don't have to worry about that.
That's it. But, it's a big issue. It's just like, where are your inputs? Where are things going? But you're telling me Firebase basically handles all of that for you.
Well, it handles some. It's not going to sanitize your stuff.
Sure.
But I can put in drop table all day long and we're not going to do anything because there's no table to drop. There's no table to drop, yeah. But there's still Firebase roles that that you can still write and you can still do the same. Like I can say in my rule that only people with this level, conditions for who can write and who cannot write or who can read. And I can put validations for if you're going to write, the fields need to be XYZ. I can do all that.
And resistances to SQL strings like that also come from parameterized queries. And there's many ways for the database to defend itself. So somebody has to do that work. Right. It is an interesting part of the overall equation. So what specifically about Angular forms is important in this?
Well, I tend to lean towards reactive forms, person versus template based, simply because I find that it allows me one nice big object where I can have all my validation, where I can make sure to have all of the pieces. And then it makes it for testability purposes, I can patch a value, check validity, patch a value, check validity, which makes the there's a certain level of just checking that, like if you've put in a regex to match whatever, that people aren't using, I don't know, a series of cuss words in your input field, whatever the case might be. I can easily put an array of, use cases and be like, okay, loop through this test, patch, check, check. It makes it super easy to do that. So I really like reactive forms for that because the unit testing on it is real straightforward.
It's really interesting. It's that the library for building the form can also help you with the testability.
Right.
That's a really great point. It's
Or
like
hinder.
yeah, absolutely hinder it. Like there's definitely ways to generate code that make your life nightmarish for testing.
So I'll definitely, so that's, I liked using that. And because the error handling is also really, really nice because I can write a div, an error div that shows or hides the error message based on the validity, based on checking against the validity of that object. I have a nice dynamic object I can play against. Right. So that makes the whole thing nice. And I can easily check the entire block. Okay. If every field in my form valid or not. So that's why I tend to lean towards the reactive forms for that.
And you can pick up the fields are missing as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. What about new fields are added but aren't being tested?
When new fields are added, like all you have to do is go write a new test against that new field.
You would hope.
I mean, because if you think of, okay, I'm going to check that. Because the form object in reactive forms has a high level, the form is valid, and has then for each individual input, are you valid or are you not valid? Yeah. So I can if I have a test that has that checks is my form as a whole unit valid,
right? And
then we add an input field.
Yeah,
that test is still valid.
Yeah,
whether I do a test or not, because that test still checks is my entire form valid or not.
Yeah, sure. An untested field is still effectively valid.
If the input's valid in it, sure. It depends on what you put in there. But yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just going down all the things I've seen happen, you're just listening to my pain. It's like, oh no, it passed perfectly. That's because you didn't test half of it.
Right. So it would still get, at that point, the you're not submitting unless the input is valid would still get checked.
Yeah.
Right. So say if you were checking on the object of the form's validity.
Yeah. So as long as they put in some kind of type requirement for the input, it's going to get an error, and then you can start working your way through that.
Yeah.
But it also is just part of diligence. It's like, have we got a test for every field?
Well, and I mean that's forms are just that tedious. Like there's a reason I do conference talks on specifically forms is because
it's also a huge amount of work, right? Yeah. Like this is a big part of our day is getting these forms right.
Well, and how many applications have you written that didn't involve some kind of form somewhere?
None. Right? It's just reality. Right? Yeah. It's always the case. In the end, our most of what we build is to put data into machines. Right. And they usually need forms for that at some point. So
even your basic website, it's got a contact form.
Yeah.
Like
you would hope. And maybe not a very good one, and maybe generated from somewhere else, but it's in there.
Yep.
So on the web, you're uncovering bugs in testing for bugs in markup and JavaScript and CSS.
Yep.
And I imagine of those three, CSS might be the hardest to find, maybe.
Well, CSS is the hardest to test because you're so if you're using something like Sass or less, there's a handful of libraries that will test if you have, because now you can do functions inside of Sass, right? So there's libraries to test that your functions inside of Sass itself will do, input, output, what you expect. But the reality for testing, I have a blue header is still going to be, I need to go find the header, and go usually through, if you're doing the Angular testing out of the box, it's probably going to be some time of DOM, go find H1 through the DOM or whatever, and then check against the color, by looking at, okay, I'm going to go find the styles that are being applied and go find that, whatever the winning style is blue or whatever the case might be.
The global nature of CSS makes that so hard, doesn't it?
Right. And those are going to be your tests that are going to be really hard to maintain because, you decide, your boss decides, okay, we have a branding change. We're reskinning. All those tests are now null and void.
Yeah.
And so those are tests that I don't usually write, honestly.
Yeah. that was an automatic reaction. Don't test for blue header. But it's also things that people non-technical people scream about. It's like I got on the site and the logo's wrong. And that's the end of the world.
Right.
And so, like, all right, I'm going to write a test to make sure the logo's right.
But for those sorts of things, I find that having a good, like, I'm a firm believer that not everything needs to be automated.
Right.
Like a good QA person that does a smoke test, before
knocks down a lot of things.
Especially for CSS typey things, is going to be invaluable because you're never going to test everything. You just never are.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a great point you make. You're never going to get away from a pair of human eyes on that page.
Correct.
Before you ship.
Correct.
It's just, for a major build. Like we can do automated with the testing for the minor irregular iterative revs, but when we're going to do a real update, somebody needs to take this thing out for a spin in pre-prod.
And even if it's not testing, because your unit test can help with all of those corner cases, right? Making sure you're typing every single type of stupidity that can go into this field.
Yeah. I don't want somebody typing in all of the ways you can screw up an email address.
That's where your unit tests shine. But checking that the page loads, the page loads and it looks fine. And that
it looks right.
And that it looks right. Mm-hmm. At some point you're going to have a human person. In accessibility, there are certain things you can't automate. You're going to have to test manually anyway. Mm-hmm. So you're never going to get to that full 100% automation with the technologies we have today.
Maybe it's just that people get hung up on you want to do one thing or another. Like if we're going to have a human, then let them do all of these tests, which it's just the tests that make testers angry. Like those, let automate those.
Yeah. We are for us at Andromeda, what we do is my QA person will tell us, my QA lead will be like, okay, here are the tests we hate to perform. Mm-hmm. These are the ones that are a pain in the butt. Here's we've identified what is easily automatable and will save us, a bazillion amount of hours.
Yeah.
Let's focus on those. And then the other ones we focus a lot on is if there's a bug that ever gets reported for an application, then is that something that warrants a unit test or not?
Right.
And generally that makes it super easy because you have the bug. So you can write the unit test, watch that it fails, fix it, watch that it succeeds, and move on, right? Yeah. But those are kind of the two areas we really focus on. Because
sometimes the bug you look at it and go, boy, I don't know how the heck I test for that. Like,
right,
that's
exactly.
not an easy one.
Like if the bug is, the logo is not center aligned to the rest of the header, I'm sorry, I'm not writing the test for that. That's just not going to happen.
You're going to have to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an eyeball thing, really.
Yeah.
Centering in divs? What is that?
Magic.
You know what? But I still have to look it up every single time.
Oh, of course you do.
Because I don't remember.
Yeah.
What is it?
Margin auto. Well, there's Flexbox now. So Flex makes it super easy.
Yeah.
Justify center, align center.
Flexbox is cool as long as everybody plays nice in the Flexbox. If somebody throws a grenade in the Flexbox, it's game over.
It's not cool anymore.
Oh, you can float inside of a Flexbox. That makes for fun grenades.
That does make for interesting effects. Yes, let's say that.
What about the query type problem? Checking phone, tablet, PC,
Media queries.
Different screen sizes. Yeah.
So as long as you're testing things like a form, I'll go back to the form example. I don't care which phone size you're on. That code for that validation doesn't change.
No, the validation's fine. That's brilliant. It's but you make the case then that it's like you don't unit test phone behavior.
So the one thing that you can do is making sure that things are visible.
Right.
That's one way that you can do, and so that's definitely doable. And so if you're using like Puppeteer or something like that, or even the default out of the box, you tell it, okay, I want your browser width to be X. And then you run the test and then you can check is, element whatever on the screen. And so if it's not because your media query has, hidden it and you're expecting it, that'll fail.
Right.
That's option one. The other one is now you're getting into integration tests a lot more, where like literally, you can basically run a series of tasks. I personally, we've been playing a lot with Cucumber recently.
Okay.
Just because the Gherkin, we're using the Gherkin syntax because it's nice and readable. And then I can have requirements written in that same syntax. You match directly to the integration test. You're good to go. So you would run one of those and then you can run it on a number suite. Then you can get into, there's several products out there for being able to actually physically run it on a device from whatever device farm, wherever. But, that gets to like a level of sophistication that I've very rarely seen in the wild.
Now you're getting into that sort of mythological end-to-end testing.
Correct.
Like it's just like 100% test coverage. It seems mythological.
Oh, I'm trying to get there, and we're still at the whole trying to figure out how to write the end-to-end tests and in a way that's maintainable, and that is not, that is you're balancing that whole. I need to be able to output my application and new features.
Right.
And I need to write tests. They're important. And I need to make sure my accessibility is on point. So where's that fine balance between being able to ship and spending 10 years to make sure you've got an end-to-end test, right?
Right.
So you're back to prioritizing what are my areas of concern? What are my areas that are absolutely critical to work correctly? Where are my ones that are absolutely critical that if it fails or if something goes wrong, I want to make sure that that things happen the way I want them to. Mm-hmm. It becomes a prioritization game.
Sure. But it's also like what can't I push into the wild versus what can I?
Mm. Right.
And
that level of tolerance is different for everybody.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And usually it changes over time too.
And it changes. I mean, we have different apps, right? And different apps have different levels of tolerance, like just based on what they do. So, I mean, if I'm making an app for your pacemaker, I want that level of tolerance is not going to be particularly high. Yeah, it's going to be real tight.
And we're going to impair updates and improvements because quality needs to be very, very high.
Exactly. If I'm making an app for you to be, for playing, I don't know, some video game on your, that tolerance can be a lot lower.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Let them play.
Exactly.
And if we end up with a little dirty data along the way because we mess up some validations, we'll live.
I mean, what's that video game with the goats that's notoriously bad and full of bugs, right? Like that proves it right there. The level of tolerance can be a lot different versus, like a life-saving device or whatever. You've got,
Maybe it was written by goats.
Goat Simulator.
That's the one.
I've watched some Let's Plays of Goat Simulator. That costs you IQ points every time. They do have.
I'm already feeling stupid.
Yeah, they do have demon goats. And I'm going to interrupt for one moment for this very important message.
There's always something new from our sponsor, Text Control. They just released version 30 of their document processing library that includes new document collaboration features. Using TX Text Control, you can integrate online document editing, document signing, collaboration, and PDF processing into your ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core web applications. Whether you need to create PDF invoices, quotations, or reports, TX Text Control provides the developer libraries for all document-related tasks. Check out the new features and see their technologies in action by visiting the live demo at demos.textcontrol.com. Hey, guess what? The .NET Developer Days Conference is happening October 18th and 19th in Warsaw, with some great speakers and over 30 technical sessions spread over 2 days. Among them are keynotes by Scott Hunter and James Montemagno. If you can't make it to Warsaw in person, they also offer a great online option. For only €150, you can access 2 days of live-streamed conference sessions, as well as all the session recordings after the show. Check them out at developerdays.pl and take 20% off your online registration with the code ROCKS. That's ROCKS !
And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Yo.
Talking to our friend Martine a little bit about, well, we were supposed to talk about Angular forms, so somehow we got on the Goat Simulator, and that happens sometimes. So this is how much you can do about that. Once in a while. What a game. That was a great game. No, it really wasn't. It was a horrible game.
It was a fun game. Speaking of games, is Lemmings. Remember Lemmings?
Yep.
That was fun.
The goal was to kill them all.
8-bit kind of game.
Side-scrolling kind of
Side-scrolling
puzzle game. Yeah, classics.
I don't know that one.
So you had to, the whole myth of Lemmings is that they commit suicide by jumping off cliffs.
Yeah.
But it's completely wrong. It's not true, actually. It turns out to be a myth. But the whole idea is they just keep walking, and you need to move them in such a way that they
They
make
their way out.
They make their way out
Yeah.
instead of falling to their death.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
It was fun though.
It's just a classic puzzle type game.
Yeah.
Where do we go for testing here? Unit tests automate nicely.
Yes.
For the most part. Do you get big on the big automation suites and like standing up stuff in the cloud with multiple instances to keep your tests fast? Like, how far do you go down that path?
So what I usually, right now, what I'm trying to set up, we'll see if it works, is, because Firebase has an emulation system.
Right.
Is to be able to emulate all of the pieces database related. So I don't have to worry about multiple databases.
Right.
Which will be nice. And then so that I can run end to end. So we're trying to figure out how to make that work. Mm-hmm. But usually what we'll do, what we have in most of our projects now is we use, Atlassian, so I have Bitbucket, Bitbucket pipelines, GitHub has an equivalent. I don't remember the name, but we run whenever anything is pushed to our main branch, it'll go ahead and run unit tests and lints and linting, and so that way it gives a quick and we run that in as part of a headless. We run all that headless so that it goes a little bit faster and go forth and conquer. So we do that for sure, and then anytime anything gets merged into our latest branch, we make sure it builds and it compiles and it does all the things and before it can go forth and conquer. And then we'll do automated deploys. But for the most part, haven't spent a metric butt ton at a time on it just because we personally are not to that level of sophistication, and I've yet to be with a client that had that level of sophistication. Most of the clients I've worked with, are either getting into the unit tests, or wanting to get into the unit tests. And so we're still at the very basics of, okay, what should we unit test?
Sure.
Or they're the other side where they're like, they've already got their setup, they've already got their thing, and I'm going to help them continue with whatever they already have
and
set up.
try to fit testing into that somehow.
And I'm not going to try to rock the boat if they've already got something working.
I don't know. CI/CD pipelines are like that. It's like, it works, don't touch it.
Yeah. Yep.
But, to that point, I think about Dorian's comment at the beginning of the show. There's definitely a sort of Pareto's law effect here where it's going to be tough to get started with testing, but you're going to have this moment where it's going to catch a whole bunch of stuff. Yep. And and that's going to be most of the value is going to happen in that first burst once you get over the initial hurdles.
Yep. The other thing is I would be very careful that whoever's writing the tests, you should be writing unit tests, right? But at some point, the person who wrote the code, it may be not always ideal to write the test.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it depends on the type of test and then whatever else, and then, how big your team is. And those are all factor into the feasibility. QA groups seem to be
rare these days, don't you?
They seem to be, yeah.
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 It's just hard to find people who want to work, want to be dedicated QA. They're a very specific personality, and I find them insanely valuable when you find them.
I think we have an industry problem with that. If you look at you put a QA person with 10 years experience and a developer with 10 years experience, and you look at their salaries and how they're valued by their company.
Right.
And you understand why people don't want to go into QA.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's just that simple.
Yeah. And so we end up putting the QA requirements onto the developers who wrote the code.
Right. Well, and then who gets laid off first? The developer or QA?
Yeah.
So when you look at all of those factors, as a person who doesn't have a preference A or B, why would I want to go to QA?
Yeah, why would I? You're making a more vulnerable job that's paid poorly and generally treated badly.
Correct.
Because it's like people like to shoot the messenger, and the QA's always got a message your code doesn't work.
Yep.
Or doesn't do what it's supposed to.
Worked with clients where the teams had very, very bad relationships with their QA because it became a game of what works on my machine, what doesn't work on mine. Yeah. Well, you're wrong. It doesn't fit the criteria. Well, just let it pass. Well, no, and it becomes a fight instead of being a collaboration.
Yeah. They're not on the same side of the problem.
And it's different skills.
Yeah. Right.
And I blame Scrum.
Do you?
I blame Scrum.
I'm not going to argue with
Scrum.
I blame Scrum because not everybody should people understand each other's jobs? Yes.
Yeah.
but I don't think that people should be required to know how to do each other's jobs.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
fair.
that there's a value in specializing. Now that's a personal opinion. I know people
I agree
disagree with
you.
me, but
The battle is not valuing the other job.
correct.
And one way to value the job is to know it.
Right.
But there's other ways to get to just valuing it.
Yep.
You know, I liked when we could get our team together and present to each other how we did our work. I'm not trying to educate you on doing the work. I'm trying to get you to understand it's hard.
Well, and what makes it easier? So for simply like, depending on how your teams work, one of the projects I worked on, we kept on having issues with communication between QA and dev. And it turned out that it was just a matter of, hey, if you make sure to screenshot with URL every time, it makes our life a whole lot easier. It makes it so much easier for us to figure out, like, screenshot big fat arrows and circles and we're happy.
Yep.
And like, it took a 10-minute conversation and suddenly it was a much better relationship and shit worked.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Magic.
Right?
Yeah. I love the video capture approach of, QA's going through the things, gets a failure. Back up, try the failure again. Okay, clearly this is a repeatable failure. Turn on the video, do the same action.
Exactly.
Completely reproducible. Put that as part of the report.
Right.
Because it's like, you're not making anything up. And it's not like you didn't believe them the first time, but to actually see it happen. And it's like, okay, let me do those steps.
Right.
And I do firmly believe in making sure those guys sit on the same side of the table. Right? That this is about a problem in the code, not a problem with people.
Yep.
And so we're all on the same side of the problem. We want quality code to go out into the wild, and everybody's contributing to that. But
and making sure people understand that it's QA's job to test it to try to break it.
Yeah.
And that, then not to take it personal.
Yeah. And what's a reasonable break case?
Right.
We do get to part. And all things are fixed with pizza. Make them eat together.
Social lubrication.
It's hugely important.
Well, we have an all remote team, so the food is a little different, but we do regularly do games like online games and stuff like that.
I do like shipping out the same food to everybody when they're remote. We even made up a custom cocktail and shipped everybody the cocktail.
Oh wow,
so
that's an interesting concept.
They all had the same little shaker. So when they all saw it on the camera together, it's very powerful, right?
It's very cool.
It's an easy, I sat down and made a batch of Negronis, 30 of them. And then,
you know what? A drink is brilliant because not only is it easier to do, like recipe wise than cooking something. Not everybody cooks, but everybody drinks.
Yeah. Well, and we made some non-alcoholic versions of it too.
Right.
And then shipped them off in little boxes and they all arrived. It's like, don't open till we're on this call. And it's like, everybody open. Yeah. It's like, we're toasting together with the same cocktail.
Nice.
That is cool.
But, there are remote solutions and most of it comes down to intent.
We do video games. We've done, I think one of the popular favorites is Among Us, because you can ship the CEO out the airlock.
Yes. So how often do you get stuffed?
Not near as much as Michael does.
My only problem with those games is you are teaching your team members how well you can lie.
That's true.
So
that's true.
Yeah, it all depends on how people react to that part of it.
Lying is a good skill to have. It's just when you use it for the powers of good.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, stuffing the CTO, getting the CTO stuffed out of the airlock again. It's good use of it.
Yeah, I know. It's cathartic.
It is.
I do get stuffed out the airlock quite a bit,
but it is good to play. It is good to play.
Yes, and that's the idea is whether it's that last time we played it was a golf game, like Golfing with Friends, I think it's called. It's on Steam. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, there's they made a whole line of Jackbox games that were meant to be played online. And I think they made a ton of them during the pandemic.
That makes sense.
But there are also games that are equalizers, like anybody can win.
Yes.
One of the things I noticed is certain ones of those games, and I'm thinking of the murder mystery game especially, is if somebody gets too far in the lead, the game starts penalizing that person.
Oh, that's funny.
Right? So that it's hilarious the way the game responds to that. It's like, okay, we're going to put a hat on you, that kind of thing, and it just sort of mess with your character. But it basically means that by the end of the game, anybody could win.
Nice.
And that is constructive, right? It's a very positive effect, and it makes the game, I'm always concerned about that sort of dynamics. Like, am I bringing the team together or further apart?
Well, we try to pick games that are like low skill games.
Werewolf is a good one.
Oh, that's a fun one. Because not everybody on the team games. So.
Yeah. I do appreciate that these are all devices to try and make the team tighter. Like, you really want QA and dev on the same side because in the end, the goal is to deliver good software.
The other thing I found particularly useful is a good business analyst. Because if your requirements are nice and solid from the get-go and are nice and clear, it makes it a lot easier for QA to know what to test, for developers to know what to develop, and to be able to tell what, yes, this is a use case. No, this is not a use case, or this is working as this is working as intended battles.
Yes.
If you have clear requirements.
Yeah, right.
So I think that a business analyst and a good idea of a nice definition, even if you're doing, like, we do a lot of MVP and POC work, even at that level, it's not impossible to write nice, clean requirement for that bit that you're going to write, even if it is a rough cut of what it's going to be in the end.
It's a proof of concept. That means there should be a proof.
Right, exactly.
That
and
should be testable.
And a concept.
Yeah. But you're right. Clarity takes, and again, it gives you something for everyone to sit on the same table of.
Correct.
This was the requirement.
Yep.
Have we achieved the requirement? Is the requirement clear enough?
Yep.
And I also appreciate, before the code gets written, the QA folks getting a look at that requirement too and saying, how are we going to test this?
And what's out of scope.
Yeah.
A clear definition of not just the requirement, but X, Y, and Z are completely out of scope and defined as out of scope.
About doing that.
We're not even playing with this.
Well, that's also a great moment where dev and QA are sitting on the same side of the table with the analysts saying, listen, like, we need to be this to be clearer.
Yep.
In the interest of harmonious life. That,
in the interest of sanity for the most part.
Because otherwise, we're running off making tests for things that don't matter, and they're writing features that are vaguely implemented,
or that are not what we're looking for in the first place, or trying to test in the first place.
Yeah. Well, and I've had the analyst come back and say, listen, the customer's not sure what we want, so let's work broadly here, expecting feedback that's going to change it. But by that token, it's like, test lightly. It's not going to go in the field in this form.
Or you can still say, let's try. You can still make an executive decision and say, let's implement it this way. Let them give feedback and change it. But we can still, at that point, you're still agreeing to implement it a certain way.
Right. And not spending too much money on details that may not matter yet because we're not sure this is where the customer wants to go.
Yeah.
Sometimes requirements aren't that good.
Yep.
Sometimes you have that, rough customers, like they don't know what they want.
Yeah.
My favorite, I want to strangle you phrase is, I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah, kill me. Honestly. Well,
right?
Good. Yeah. Hey, you're never gonna see it. So.
Yep. Yeah, that's especially when it comes to design things, which are even harder to a lot of for requirements and for a lot of people to articulate. I find then what should this do? Like, what should it look like? It's very hard for in a lot of ways to articulate.
But there is a sort of gestalt or intuition aspect of good software. Like, not everything is perfectly measurable.
True, but a lot more of it is a lot more is mathematically provable than people think.
I tend to agree, but I got to leave room for, there is a sense that people are going to have about.
Well, and that's where a good style guide comes in.
Sure.
Like, because it takes out a lot of that guesswork, because it's like, if these are the colors we've chosen, these are the fonts we've chosen, now the last piece that's left is layout.
Right. But that's also good in the POC part. It's like, we've come up with a colorway, sort of a look that you want. Here's a couple of sample pages that are using that colorway. Are you happy? All right. Now we're going to spend more money going deeper into doing a form implementation.
And that can even be done even before implementation, because it's not like Photoshop or between Photoshop, Illustrator, and all of XD and Scratch and what's the other one? It's a Mac one. Anyway, all of those programs, it doesn't matter. It's easy to take a page, skin it 3 times, and be like, okay, here are your looks, right?
Yeah.
And even before it goes to implementation.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part on the analyst side, is to do some of those iterations and help when the customer is vague, to help box them in a little,
right?
Save the rest of those resources.
Yep.
You don't want to be stuck writing throwaway tests. You don't want to be stuck writing throwaway code.
Nope.
People care.
Well, but it's important to know that when it needs to be thrown away.
Yeah, I guess. some point the analyst can't go any further either.
Right.
I think this is all about knowing the other person's job is hard.
Yep.
It's like, I have gotten as much from this customer as this customer is capable of doing. We have to do some test cases.
Yep.
We have to bring more to them.
Yep.
And let them feel it. It may be tossed.
Yep.
But, you're just managing expectation at that point. And
that's the important bit, I think.
Yeah.
Is to understand once you've defined, it's a whole lot of that pre-work that we tend to not want to do as developers because we're like, ooh, cool new project.
Let me write the code. I want to write the code.
Yeah. And we're chomping at the bit to get started when we really need to stop and organize and think and do all those kind of prep stuff and paperwork quote, that we don't want to do.
Well, you get the first cut from the analyst, you start coding, and then the next cut comes from the analyst, and it's interfering with the code you wanted to write, so you ignore it.
Yep.
This is a pipeline, and the further down you go, the more expensive it is. And then you've got a team who's built a bunch of tests around a bunch of stuff that, the customer has already made it clear they don't want.
Well, and then there's levels of testing for how early and how POC it is, right? Because there's nothing wrong with saying we're going to create this component or whatever, right? And show it to the customer, make sure that it's what they're looking for, make sure that it operates the way they want to, and then go write the tests if that's legit, if that's what we want to do, if that's what we want to keep.
Yeah, I like the idea of having a little bit of light testing in the pipeline just to make sure that engine is working in the pipeline, but not enough tests that we care that we have to redo it all.
Right.
As you get further down the POC.
Yeah.
But I do like having every piece of the pipeline exercise as early as possible.
Oh, we put linting in from day one, for example. There's no excuse in that.
No, it should be plugged in.
Yeah.
But the longer you wait to add stuff to your pipeline, the sadder you're going to be.
Yeah.
So having all of those things in there, just not pouring a ton of time into detailed testing when you don't have a detailed spec.
But then the flip side is once you do have we've had projects, and this happens a lot with, it's that very early POC MVP. You have pieces of that application that stay for years and years and years after it. And nobody ever goes back to write the tests.
Yeah.
Because you kind of forget it because it's part of that.
Well, it got tested in production.
Pretty much. Because you think of your basic login. Once it's written in there, it's part of just about every application.
Forever.
Once it's written and then it's there, you're never going to have to touch it again. Unless there's some kind of
Well, in the end, it's not going to break if you never modify it. The whole thing is, as soon as somebody wants a change in that, the testing requirement comes in big time.
But that doesn't mean you wrote it correctly or created it correctly in the first place.
For sure.
So there's pieces where you end up, I think there's always going to be a little bit of tech debt that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you can write code without some technical debt.
Yeah.
It's just, the question is, are you acknowledging its accumulation?
And are you acknowledging that lack of testing and lack of unit test and end-to-end or whatever is part of tech debt?
Sure. And we took it on for a reasonable reason.
Right.
We were in a vague stage in the app. It didn't make sense to write a lot of tests right now because we thought we might go a different way. Oh, we didn't. So we now do need to build tests on that at some point. We happen to know it's working because we put it out there and it didn't die. So that's a test. But if you come back into here for any reason, you owe this.
Yep.
But you know what? That's sprint plannable.
The other piece that we test usually from day one is going to be accessibility.
Yeah.
Because it's so much easier to write from the ground up, even if it's going to be throwaway, even if it's a piece that you're never going to use again. Because one, you don't know who's on the other end of that POC, even trying out the POC. So you want it to be accessible there anyway. And two, it's so much harder, exponentially harder to retrofit and fix that is just not worth not doing it from day one.
And it's not that tough to get the fundamentals in there up front.
Depends on the component.
Yeah, when we're talking about accessibility, what do you mean? I mean,
making sure that go down the WCAG AA requirements.
Right.
So it's going to be your color contrast. It's going to be, can you navigate the app with just your keyboard? With that. So basically unplug your mouse, set it to the side, and can you still get to everything and do everything you want? It's going to be form fields and labels, button labels, links. Are links actually links and our buttons actually buttons? Do any other elements have on clicks for whatever reason that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's all those things and the inner workings of, and some of them can be automated through like Lighthouse or the Microsoft one, Accessibility Insights. You can test a lot through that. But there's still that lack of mouse piece still needs to be done, manually, and that, so because the keyboard traps, right? Which means that you can get into something but not back out again.
Right.
And then, like, if you have images in the background, you'll probably still have to test your contrast manually because, well, the image can have 50 different colors, right?
The contrast one's really interesting because that's going to set up a basic colorway. Like, is this colorway tolerant to colorblind folks and that kind of
Correct.
thing? Like, you definitely want that at the beginning because if you've now put a style together, everybody's going to be annoyed to change it after the fact.
Right. And so that's something you definitely want to make sure you're collaborating with, if you have a specific designer on your team, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you're collaborating with your design and marketing, because there's nothing worse than your brand guide not being accessible.
Right.
And then now you're getting into like fights between, well, I want it accessible. What doesn't follow the brand? Well, and
Yeah.
that back and forth. And so if all of these
It's
are
really
in
part
line,
of our brand inaccessibility. Like, you kind of want those statements up front.
Yep.
Easy to get. I also I'm always of the part of, like, we just said this very casually. It's like, if you don't put accessibility in, it's really hard. So do it early. But then there's a bunch of that stuff that's not that hard to add late. But the navigation piece, like getting, can we navigate our site without a mouse?
Right.
Yeah, you need that early because it's a navigational engine. So the fact that we would validate accessibility on this navigational engine, have confidence in that, even if we haven't implemented everything.
Yeah. So there's nothing about accessibility is easier post.
Yeah.
Like, that's really the end all be all, because even if you think of,
Unless it's really minor. It's all texts and things like that.
like forgetting a label. Okay.
Yeah.
If you forgot one, okay, that's easy enough to go fix. But if you haven't been testing from the get-go and you realize that none of your forms and your entire applications have correctly done labels, it's a lot of work to go and redo.
Yeah.
Which
and
could
it
have
wasn't
been
much work to do while you were making the form.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's that end time that you get, like the further down the road you get, is so bad for accessibility. Just do it from the beginning.
Getting accessibility into the proof of concept, just so those elements are already there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I'm on board now, Martine. You've sold it to me.
Well, and who's using that proof of concept?
Right.
That person, you don't necessarily know that whoever's testing that proof of concept doesn't have a disability.
Yeah.
You don't know. It's 1 in 4 Americans at this point.
Sure. When you talk about things like colorblindness and
but anything because there's the cognitive and neurological. There's so many things, and I mean, we don't want to force people to disclose something they don't feel is any of your business. Right. So you don't, and so many disabilities are not visible at all.
Sure.
You don't know. And if you're in a team, even in terms of your own people and your own team working with the application, if you consider that 1 in 4 Americans have a disability, the likelihood of somebody on your team being one of those people
so as
is
soon as
really,
you're
really
4
high.
people, you're, pushing 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
Colorblindness is actually very much more common than anybody thought, isn't it?
Sure.
Like confusing red and green.
Red green blindness is in males the most common flavor.
Because it's on the XY chromosome, so
Absolutely.
you guys are luck on that.
Every time.
Yeah.
But it is the thing is, it's one of those things that people routinely compensate for and never directly articulate.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And so,
but it's also little things like the color contrast that helps with more than that. If you think of, you're walking down the street on your phone and you've got a glare on your screen, color contrast is going to help a lot.
Sure.
Or even here.
For everybody.
We're at a conference, right?
Yep.
Those projectors wash out the screens.
Yeah.
Like hardcore, right?
Yeah.
And so having proper color contrast even in our slide decks makes a big difference to the audience, even if the audience doesn't have any color blindness, just because the projector washes out the screen. So there's so many reasons to do it, even beyond that. So you really want that POC to be accessible from the beginning because you don't know who's on the other end.
Sure. And putting it in later is going to be harder.
Yep.
So get it now.
Yep.
No, I'm not going to argue with you. That's brilliant. It's right. And it's just, it's not that big of a deal to add. It's one more thing to think about when people are racing to a POC.
And it's a skill.
Yeah. You
More
will
than
get better
anything,
at it.
it's a skill that needs to be learned.
Yeah. And just be part of your workflow.
Yeah.
The same way you include security in your work, the same way you include testing in your work, the same way you build a pipeline every time. You know?
But it also means that if your team isn't aware of it yet
Yeah.
and doesn't know accessibility already, the learning curve needs to be taken in consideration in your timelines.
Sure.
And it also means that the testing, and there is a little bit of extra work to do in terms of development, also needs to be taken in consideration in the timelines. So if your timelines don't allow for it, you're already kind of, messing up from the get-go.
Yeah. They're not going to be as fast as this the first couple of times. And it's always going to have a little bit of overhead, even when they are good at it.
Correct. Because you're going to need to write it and test it.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's worth it too.
Yeah.
Accessibility features are testable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's another set of tests to build as well.
Yep.
Make sure we've got them.
Mm-hmm. And there's in-browser ones, so you can do a quick check. There's a manual aspect. There always will be. But for the more automated stuff, there's already engines out there to help you with that. So Lighthouse, Accessibility Insights, there's, and several of them also have command line based ones, so you can even add it into your pipeline.
Right.
So there's, even, so you can totally add, I think it's called Axe Core, there's also Pally, I think is another one. But anyway, there's multiples out there that have, command line based systems you can totally put in a CI/CD and be done. So
I'll include links to all of those, to Lighthouse, Pally, Accessibility Insights. So if folks want to get them, just get them off the show notes.
Are there Bootstrap themes that have sort of accessibility built in that you know of?
I don't know. I haven't used Bootstrap in a very long time.
Yeah.
It's not the way we do it these days.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking of, what are some other pieces of advice we can give to developers that they can just go sort of drag and drop into their projects?
Well,
I guess
more often than not, if a library or a theme has taken in consideration accessibility, it will say so in the docs.
Yeah.
Because it takes extra work, and it's something that generally you're going to have a team that is, they're going to showcase that.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't in the docs say that they've tested for it, don't bank on it. But if it does, so I would say look at the documentation and see if they mention accessibility somewhere, then you'll know what they've tested and what they've done or what their thing is. And if they don't mention it anywhere in their docs, don't bank on it being
Don't expect to be there. And it's
Yeah.
worth having a conversation as early and as often as possible, too. I need my customer committed to, yes, the time it takes to build accessibility features is worth it and important to us.
Correct.
Part of the culture. Martine, so much fun to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming out.
Definitely.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was great talk. And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.